Welcome to Strength in the Numbers. My name is Andrew Codd, accountant, author, and commercial finance entrepreneur, and it's my job each week to bring you leaders in finance and business and deconstruct with them their real stories, insights, and hard-won lessons into practical advice on the key strengths and qualities you need to remain relevant in accounting and finance today, as well as the steps you can begin to take to elevate the impact you make to have a fun, successful, and rewarding career in accounting and finance. Now let's go over to the show.
You've got to understand both sides of the table, and that's the challenge, I think.
This is a key and very useful insight from today's guest mentor, Dr. Paul Thambar, because there's so much opportunity in doing this from both our perspective as practitioners and academics alike, to help both of us better navigate and learn the best path forwards in these times of unprecedented change. And some of the key areas that Paul and I deconstruct on today's episode around some of the unique experiences he's gained from crossing over to what he calls the dark side of academia, some ideas on how we can perhaps close the gap between academia and business, and Paul shares some very interesting research around perhaps taking a more qualitative rather than quantitative approach to performance measurements that he's been working on with some others in some mutuals and cooperative organisations. So look, hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, you can check out and find the timestamp show notes, key quotes, resources and ways to connect with Paul at SITNshow.com. And we also really appreciate when you recommend the show to your colleagues and your friends. We love hearing their stories of how they found the show. You can subscribe on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube and Spotify. And we really appreciate you investing your time with us today. So without further ado, over to Paul and the show. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for having me.
Look, it's our pleasure having you, Paul, and you were recommended by a previous guest mentor as well on the show. That's always a good sign, a good start, and some of our audience, like we do on the show, may not be as familiar with your story in accounting and finance. So would you mind maybe sharing with us a brief synopsis of your journey in accounting and finance, please?
Sure. So I'm what I would refer to as a hybrid. I've been an industry practitioner for around 20 years, working in accounting and finance roles, mainly in financial services, so banks, insurance companies, funds management companies in Australia. I am CIMA qualified, and so I'm basically a management accountant, but have worked in a range of different roles, including the early stages of business partnering and sort of more in sort of strategy type roles or towards the end of my time in industry. And then I had a bit of a career change, and the last 10 years or so I'm in academia. I decided to cross over to the dark side, as someone, and I've always had an interest in academia, in the sense of I've wanted to be intellectually challenged, which I found was getting less and less as I moved into more senior roles in business. And I then decided to make the switch. I had been doing some casual teaching. I went and did an MBA in one of the business schools, and during that time I made some connections, and people said to me, look, we need people like you with business experience in academia, in business schools, to talk to our students, to go into organizations, to look at how accounting is practiced. Are you interested? And my initial reaction was, well, I am, but I don't think you can afford me, and I can't afford you. And they said, well, give us a go, let's see what we can come up with. So they did come to the party, sort of. I had to take maybe a small cut in pay, but it was worth the journey, I think. But, doing a PhD almost sort of stuffed me, because it is an intellectual challenge in more than what I thought it was initially. But now I'm having a ball, because you can pretty much do what I was doing before. I go into organizations all the time. I'm talking to CFOs and just sitting on the other side and not having the stress and strain of what they're going, and just investigating what they do and writing about it.
Well, actually, interesting enough there, Paul, the way you're painting that picture, all right? I just got this picture in my head of a load of accountants and finance professionals that are rushing to quit their jobs and go into academia themselves. But I suppose if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it, right? So I suppose. But you mentioned the word challenge a few times.
Yeah, it's also being willing to be challenged. I think a lot of us talk the talk, but we don't necessarily walk the walk. I mean, it was a huge risk for me in many ways to move across. I mean, in the initial conversations, they didn't sort of put the PhD on the table, but once they realized that I was serious and they sort of had hooked me in, they sort of casually dropped it on me one day, saying, "Look, by the way, if you come over, you will have to do a PhD because that's a basic qualification that you need to have in a business school." And I had to go away for a few days and actually have a think about it, because doing PhD after having, while I do a fair amount of reading and keeping in touch with things, doing a PhD is going to another, whole new level. It's a journey. So yeah, so not everyone will. It's not everyone's cup of tea, as I've realized over the years, as people have said to me, "Oh, how do you do this? I want to do this." The initial reaction, I want to follow the same path, and I say to them, "Fine, but here's the path. It's not all glory, hard work, and yeah." So
yeah, because I just didn't want to sort of look. I appreciate like you're really enjoying it, and I can get that from what you're saying, your tone of voice. It's been the right path for you. I was thinking that for some of our audience, it's not an easy option. I think there's probably this perception that because people are still in industry, that they're sort of having to deal with a lot of the politics and all the latest disruption that's going on. Academia is not an easy road either. I do want to sort of to come across like that, and I do want to actually delve into some of what the exciting things you're looking at as well, Paul. But before that, I did actually sort of have a question around, I suppose, when it comes to, you've seen both sides of it, they use expression hybrid. With all that disruption, digital, the pressure on finance and accounting to evolve, I mean, where can the academics out there help those in industry and vice versa? I mean, how can we get the most out of each other is what I'm saying.
That's a great question, Andrew. I wish I had a perfect answer. I think I'd be able to make a few million, possibly with. So I'll tell you the perspective, my perspective from just the Australian scene, and then we'll talk about the global scene. In Australia, I think there's been quite a sort of a gulf between academia and business. Now, for a number of reasons. A lot of academics basically business academics have no concept of what happens in an organization. And that's because, they've just come through, they've done, the undergrad, they've done an honors year. They may have done some internship, may have spent a couple of years, with one of the accounting firms or consulting firms or in industry. And then they come back, they do a PhD, and then they are academics. And a lot of them who work more quantitatively do their research by going into databases and, collecting, accounting data and running an integration model. And they write to a community that is just, people like themselves. So they don't really understand what I refer to as the empirical phenomenon. So to give you an example, I have sat in research seminars where people are talking about, say, something to do with financial accounting, maybe a concept like earnings management, which is a practice, where every organization manages its earnings. So if you optimize your tax, for example, that is earnings management. So I'm sitting at these seminars and they're talking about these things. And I say to them, hang on, yeah, so what? Every company does this. What's new here? And they look at me sometimes. And in fact, I caused a bit of a stir once because there was a guy who was talking about doing some work around something to do with tax. His research was around tax. And they were talking about earnings management. They weren't talking about earnings management. And I said to them, hang on, one of the ways you manage your earnings is by aggressively managing your tax expense. Now, you're talking about, tax minimization and sort of, research around that, but you haven't mentioned anything about this. Just a throwaway comment at the end of a seminar, they opened up for questions, and then I ran into the guy a few days later, and he said to me, "You bastard, the language, why didn't you keep your mouth shut?" And I said, "Why?" I knew him quite well, and he was a bit of an older guy as well, so he was also sort of someone who had come back to sort of do this as a sort of a second career. And he said, "Oh, that bloody question that you asked was so good that they've now asked me to do more work to find out." Why we haven't looked at that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but, I just asked the obvious question. So, the challenge is that a lot of our academics don't really understand this. That is changing. That is changing because universities are to have impactful research conducted. So, things are changing. But also on the business side, we are very lazy. We are lazy thinkers. We think that we are very, deep thinkers, but we are not. I mean, the thing that used to, frustrate me was the fact that you go into a meeting in business and they'll be talking about presumably, a meeting called to discuss a particular problem, a strategic problem, and they're talking about the symptoms. And then when you want the real problem, they say, hang on. All right, we've spent 10 minutes discussing the problem. Now I want a solution, and I want it yesterday, and I want it to be no more than 3 steps. And I look at the person chairing the meeting saying, hang on, we haven't discussed the problem. We've discussed the symptoms maybe, but not all the symptoms. Let's think about the problem. And let's break it down. Let's really, now we got to get a solution because upstairs want a solution, within a week. So, business is also very reluctant, very short-term focused. It's all about, what can I do, today to fix my earnings for the next quarter. So there is that. So there is problems on both sides. Now that's the Australian scene. I think things are improving because both sides are realizing that they need each other, but there's still a long way to go. Now, I think the relationship is a bit different. I think in the US, for example, the relationship is much closer. Most business school academics, do a lot of work with businesses. The relationship is much closer, I think. In Europe, I'm not sure. In the UK, I think it's pretty similar to us, I think, to a large extent. I'm not sure how it is in your part of the world. In continental Europe, my sense is there's a bit more collaboration happening between the two, but we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in getting the two sides together. How do we?
Yeah,
I think
exactly. Yeah.
I think we have to do a research that is useful, impactful, and I've got a couple of examples that I can share with you about what we are doing. I think business needs to be more engaging. Business need to be interested in. So people say to me, for example, when I do workshops, one of the questions you get asked is, okay, with budgeting, how can I improve the process? How can I get people engaged? And I say to them, well, there's nothing new here. We've known how to work with budgets. There's 60 years of research since the 50s on not just the technical aspects of budgeting, but also the soft side of budgeting, as we call it. How do you get people to participate? How do you motivate? But you get asked, questions around, okay, how do I get people to do it? Because business doesn't spend the time, going through the literature or looking at the literature. I mean, frequently when I run a workshop, I will actually put up a paper of mine and say, okay, this paper, and I recently did this at a master class. I published a paper in Accounting Organizations and Society, which is the number one management accounting journal in the world, academic journal in the world. Elsevier publishes it. I said, how many of you have read this? Not one hand went up. There were about 120 people in the room. I'll tell you, I'm not surprised. How many academics have read this? Probably about 20 academics would read this. So this is the challenge we have. So how do we get research out onto platforms that practitioners will access? So we're looking at things like, LinkedIn obviously is one platform. There are other platforms that we are publishing stuff in. If you look at my email, below my email signature, there are links to articles that we have written and put on our what we call Monash Impact, which is an online journal aimed at industry practitioners and written in a way that is easily consumable by practitioners. So there's a lot of things that we can do together, but there needs to be willingness on both sides. So I'll just pause there and just see whether I've answered your question or whether you have.
No, it's actually no. First of all, I actually had no expectation as to where the answer would go. But no, now that you walked us through that, I actually get it. I can sort of see it in our own finance world here, that we're great at making excuses about being so busy with all the various cycles we have. You mentioned budget, but then there's the reforecasting. There's all the closes. There's providing the decision support to people to make decisions yesterday. There's the various initiatives around automation and digitization and outsourcing. So we're constantly just going without, how many of us are actually taking time just to do the basic reflection, reading, space to think? And yeah, no, I'd never really thought about accessing academic journals in that way. I have to say, I probably don't read as much as I used to when I was starting out in the profession. So some really good points there. Actually, Paul, there was something I know we talked about previously. I'd love to sort of pick your brains on a bit more, which was this thinking. I think you were saying around the various challenges around quantitative measurement and qualitative measurement. The fact that nowadays, we sort of have a fair understanding of financial indicators, but there's other sort of pressures being put on not just finance, but other teams out there to sort of measure things that are a bit maybe more difficult. Would you mind maybe sharing some of the work you've done in that space around qualitative and quantitative measurement?
Yep. So we've just finished with 4 other colleagues, one of whom is from the Warwick Business School in the UK. We have just finished a 2-year study for a whole sector, mutuals and cooperatives. Have you come across these organizations? These organizations that are not don't have shareholders, but they have members. So they could be agricultural cooperatives. They could be retail cooperatives. One of the biggest cooperatives in the world is Rabobank, very successful mutual bank, but founded and run on cooperative principles. So these are organizations that are not just out there trying to achieve commercial objectives. They also have a social purpose and objective. So we have done a study of these organizations in Australia, funded by the sector themselves, because they came to us wanting to develop a performance measurement framework that could allow them to capture the value, the total value that they feel they create, which cannot be entirely captured in the accounting numbers they are reporting. So, for example, if you are a road mutual, these are organizations that will come come and help you if your car breaks down in the middle of the road. Probably have them there as well, right? Yeah. So now these organizations, they don't just provide commercial services like roadside assistance, as they call it. So in Australia, for example, if you are, whether you're living in a regional area or whether you're living in a city, major city, the cost of roadside assistance is the same. You pay the same amount. Clearly, the cost of providing the service in a regional area, and I don't know whether you know much about Australia, but in Australia is a fairly big country. The whole of Western Australia, the landmass of Western Australia is bigger than Europe.
That's crazy.
So that gives you a sense, So if you're stuck in the middle of whoop whoop, you're gonna be stuck unless someone comes out, like one of these roadside mutuals. Now, that doesn't mean so that therefore they're not just providing a commercial service; they are also providing some added value. Now, how do you capture that? Or if, for example, if they lobby the government to improve safety on roads, for example, how will you measure that? The impact. You can measure the input, you can measure the output, but how will you measure the impact? So we have basically gone and looked at what these organizations do. They operate across multiple sectors. And we have developed a framework that allows them to measure the value that they create. And when we say measure, we are using the term very broadly, not just in quantified, but also in qualitative ways. So if you think about performance measurement, the first thing you got to know is, what are you trying to measure? What is the underlying phenomena that you're trying to measure?
Yes.
Then you've got to work out what are the dimensions of that phenomenon, because that is also part of measurement. Now, the reason we have in accounting, we measure revenue, costs, and then we break it down, is because we have developed over 500 years, we have developed the dimensions of accounting performance. But if you go back 200 years and look at the literature, you will find they were arguing about, what is profit? Why is this profit? Why is revenue minus cost profit?
So these things take that for granted now, right?
Yes, exactly. So we are having these conversations now around the sort of the non-accounting areas of performance. So we have developed this framework, which we are now going to be presenting at the main industry conference for this sector in a couple of weeks in Perth, where we will have a room full of CEOs from these organizations. There's about 2,000 organizations, but there were only 13 organizations involved in our study, but there's 2,000 of them across the country. So they're going to be sitting there listening to our presentation of our findings and the framework that we have come up with, including measures, both quant and qualitative measures. We have field tested this framework with 3 of the organizations that were working with us, and they have sort of found that the framework can be worked. So it's a generic framework that can be customized. So through that process, what we have developed is we have developed 6 dimensions of performance where they are creating value. We have then helped them define that. We have helped them, think of performance objectives for each of those dimensions, which again they can customize for their own purposes, because a mutual bank is going to be different to an agricultural cooperative, is going to be different to a healthcare insurer, etc., etc. So there's a diversity of people in this sector. So in terms of the measures, then we've sort of said, okay, there are the traditional accounting measures that you can work with. There's also the traditional non-accounting measures, and what I mean by that is things that we have worked with for some time. Things like customer satisfaction, staff engagement. We have there are a whole range of non-accounting measures that we have sort of, at this point of our development, we are quite comfortable. We know what it means. We know how to get the data to do the measurement, etc., etc. Yeah. But what about more out there type qualitative measures, like a testimonial from a member, a customer, like a story or a case study? Now, how do you make that type of measure something that is that has the features of representativeness, is indifferent to whether you're telling a good story or a bad story? So that's one of the frequent complaints you get about qualitative measures, or you can only the good stories. True. Yes. So in accounting, you can't, right? When if you have classified something as revenue, whether it goes positive or negative, that is revenue. You've got to report that. You can't change it. So how do you develop rules around that? And that's what we are sort of developing. We have developed some knowledge around that, and but there's more work to be done in those areas. So that's an example of some of the work that we are doing. So now this study also provides an example of how we have actually worked with industry, where we are really having they gave us $600,000 to do this study because they were tired of going to the Big Four and getting the same cookie cut phrase that doesn't meet their requirements. It is not customized to their business needs, doesn't take into account their business model, etc., etc. This is a great example of where we are working with a sector. They came to us. I mean, it's quite a interesting story in terms of how they found us. And we are the first accounting academic team that they have worked with. They gave us money. In fact, the CEO of our industry partner always tells me, I don't know, Paul, you worked your magic on my board. I have never seen them fund a research project, and they do a lot of research with other academics, other disciplines. I haven't seen them fund anyone like the way they funded you guys. No questions asked. We put it on the table. This is what it'll take us to do this over 2 years, and they said, basically, yep. Where do we sign? So it can be done, but you got to work. You got to work with you got to understand both sides of the table, and that's the challenge I think that some of my academic colleagues have, that they don't have that ability or the experience to understand the other side, and as do my industry colleagues who don't have an appreciation of academia.
Yeah, I think we're based on the discussion, Paul. Like, I know personally, I'm taking away from this is definitely to start setting aside a bit more time to keep up to date with papers out there. And I'll ask in a minute sort of maybe some tips on how to do that. But I'm also encouraged that boards out there are seeing the value in measuring value and getting better at that and understanding impact better. So that's a real positive, and I look forward to keeping up to date in terms of how those developments are going. I suppose I do want to fire some quick questions at you as well, Paul, trying to be respectful of your time. You've been giving us some great advice there so far. I mean, what's been the best bit of advice you feel you've ever received, Paul?
My mom always said to me, don't wait for the phone to ring. You pick up the phone and make the call. He meant was, don't expect people to come looking for you. If you want to get something done, you go and make it happen. So I've always given that advice. I've always been proactive. I'm trying to get my son, who's just sort of in a different era or altogether in mindset, trying to get him to sort of work that. But his approach at the moment is no, Dad, if someone wants me, they'll come looking for me. And I said, no, man, it won't work. Doesn't work like that. You got to make your success to some extent. So that was one piece of advice that I've always followed, and I've always sort of In fact, some people would say that I'm a bit too pushy at times, but that's the reality.
Well, no, but I mean, no, it's worked for you. I have to say now, like it's I know it's a similar challenge with my own kids growing up so quickly. I just feel like if we don't go out there and try, make it happen, the world will pass us by. Things are moving so quickly, and it's all those great experiences and things we could go participate in, we would miss otherwise. So but actually, I wonder, like to yourself, you made that point. Is it that it's a different era now? Is it a generational thing? I mean, I think that's a golden rule. But I mean, what do you think? What do you think, Paul?
I think. I guess this is a fairly. I'm going to be making fairly generalized comments, but I think what I see now is the hunger and the passion may be coming out differently in the younger generations. It's not to say that they're not passionate, they're not hungry, not eager, but I think it's different. It's different. They are not necessarily focused on just climbing the ladder. They are more inclusive, I think. They are more interested in doing things that not just make money, but also sort of, have a bit of a social, impact. They are a bit more laid back when it comes to sort of allowing others to find their own way as well. I mean, in the old days, if you were working in a team and someone was lagging behind, you got in and gave them a bit of a kickstart, maybe give them a kick up the backside, yeah. And I think that is done differently now. I suspect. I don't know, Andrew. I mean, I think there's still a lot of young people that I see who are quite committed and are quite passionate and quite focused on climbing the ladder. But again, the ladder, I say to my students as well, it's not just vertical; it is also horizontal.
Agree.
Yeah, I have gone horizontal, and a lot of people don't do that now. That's more challenging, I think, to go horizontal. And you may not get the same sort of perks that you might find if you just go up vertically and end up as a CEO or a CFO. Whereas, if I look at my career, I've just gone horizontal. I've gone from, fairly senior roles in finance across to strategy type roles, across to operational roles, across to consulting roles, and then into academia. And I have found that journey very rewarding. In fact, probably more rewarding than some of my colleagues and friends who have sort of just kept going up the vertical line. I've had a few of them actually say to me towards the end of their careers, or as they've sort of hit that C-suite, they've sort of said, I wish I'd sort of added to my skills, and broadened my skills the way you've done it. So it's always a choice, I guess, you make. And sometimes every time you make so the problem that people forget with decision making, you frequently hear the statement, we are all free to make decisions. And yep, you're free to make a decision, but what you're not free about is you can't choose the consequences. So I have the choice to step into the middle of a busy road. That's my choice. I cannot choose the consequence of being either hit or not hit, but that's bearing down on me. Yeah. So people forget that. So I always say to people, yep, you are free to make decisions, but be aware that you're not free to choose the consequences.
That's very poignant advice, Paul. I particularly in this stage of very rapid change, we're put in position to make decisions, and also thanks for calling out the horizontal path as well. I think that's often underrated, and I think for those looking for meaningful experiences, I think there's a greater breadth there if you go horizontal. I think it's many more
And
opportunities.
that should really feed into this whole debate we have around finance business partnering, right? Because this is to some extent about going horizontal. But I think a lot of times people want to go horizontal just to get some broader exposure before they can go up hierarchical, vertical.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a win in it, definitely. And Paul, look, in terms of the conversation, you mentioned various things. Would there be any sort of, a few, resources you might recommend our audience go check out?
Well, certainly read academic articles whenever you can. I mean, that's one thing I would recommend.
Yeah, well, it seems an advantage for us the way you lined it out. Like, I don't think enough of us are doing it, so it could be a comparative advantage there.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the business schools these days, they've got online platforms where they are turning the academic articles into more practice friendly articles, so that you can actually read stuff. As I said, just just check out the couple of articles that I have got below my signature. You'll get a sense of it. In terms of books, there's a lot of self-help books. There's a lot of books that the best type of books I would suggest is read books which have been written by academics, which is based on research that they have then written into an accessible sort of book. So, for example, the study that we've done, the 2-year study, one of the outputs that we are planning to have in the next couple of years is a book where we turn the research and the findings into a book that is easily accessible by practitioners. And there's plenty of examples of those sort of books around. For practitioners particularly, I would recommend a book written by a guy called Cal Newport, and the title of the book is called Deep Work. Yeah, I think that's a great book. Again, that's based on a lot of research, and it's really I think just the title of the book itself sends a clear message to practitioners that they really need to think more deeply about the issues and challenges that they are faced with.
Yeah, well, to be frank about it, Paul. I mean, I think I sort of remember bits of that book. Trying to stay away from the shallows or whatever. But I do think that's a defining quality to be human. Is we've been given this ability to think, so let's go use it. And particularly I like the idea of reflection as well. So look, that's a great recommendation. I'm going to put some of those points into the show notes. I suppose if any of our audience wish to continue the conversation, where's the best place to connect with you at?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm reasonably active. I'm not I don't post every day, but they can contact me there, or they can contact me through the website. If they Google me, they'll come up with my Monash staff profile, and there's my emails there as well. So email is fine.
Awesome, Paul. Thanks for those. And I suppose, look, we've covered a number of different areas, particularly how we could probably get a bit closer from practitioners and academics, bridge that gap a bit. We touched on the performance measurement, qualitative and quantitative, and also very good point about horizontal versus vertical opportunities. In terms of our audience, would you maybe have any other parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I think it's a great time to be a finance practitioner, I think, because we are seeing a lot of change that is coming through in a whole range of organizations. I go into NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and I can see the change that is happening in their world, in terms of technology, in terms of capabilities, in terms of the wicked problems that we are faced with, problems that require collaboration across organizations, across ecosystems, and it requires a fairly structured, deep sort of thinking, and analysis, and a longer term view of things, if we are to actually get on top of some of these challenges, and also work with the technology and the opportunities that it creates, to help solve some of these big challenges and problems. So I think it's a great time to be a finance professional, but I would certainly encourage folk to be more, to become more, I guess, what's the word, considered in the way they actually approach things. I do despair sometimes when I look at what's going on LinkedIn. There is a lot of superficial stuff, a lot of stuff just regurgitated, not really, stuff. I mean, stuff that is proposed as new knowledge or new things, but really not new. I'll give you an example: driver-based budgeting. You'll find there's a whole range of people pushing driver-based budgeting. We've been doing driver-based budgeting for 20 years. Nothing new there. Now if business hasn't captured or hasn't got on top of it, then that's a problem. But that's an example of where we don't think deeply and carefully and put in place the right solutions to problems that are well known. So yeah.
And actually, just on that one, Paul, I think that's a great way of wrapping up, because the whole premise of the show, the strength in the numbers, I do feel within our profession, whether it be on the practitioner side or the academic side, we do actually have a lot of the answers to steer us through all the changes going on, the challenges, whether it be trade-wise or technology-wise or whatever. I do feel we have them. It's just, if we maybe shared a bit more and talk with each other a bit more, and I cut through some of the sort of the claims that have been made down and down to the brass tacks as to what really works. And I appreciate each environment might be different, but the basic steps, we could break it down and deconstruct it down to those, which is what we do in the show. I think we've a much better chance of a meaningful future. So Paul, I really appreciate. Sorry, go on. You're saying.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Andrew. So just on that point, Andrew. I mean, one of the things that I would like to see, happening is more forums, yes. Conferences, I don't know, online forums, whatever, where we can get academics and practitioners to interact and engage. And I don't know how we can do this, but I'm certainly very interested in being able to encourage some of these things to be set up. I mean, I don't think we see enough of that. We all go to conferences, the academic conferences, the practitioners go to the practice conferences, the professional.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Professional associations, have annual conferences all over the world, but a lot of this, is really, it's segregated. See, I saw this work very well in some research I did a few years ago in the cotton industry here in Australia, where there's a whole array. There were growing cotton in Australia had some really massive challenges, and they were, over a long period of time, they worked with a lot of scientists, agricultural, science people, to help set the industry up. And what amazed me was that you would find that their annual conference, that you would find a room full of, let's say, there might be, 200 cotton farmers sitting and listening to an ag scientist from one of the universities talk about latest research and some of their findings, and asking questions and challenging. I mean, it was just amazing, And I used to always think, wouldn't it be great if we could have this at the beginning of town, where, you had a conference where you had, the top 50 companies, the CEOs sitting there and listening to, the latest accounting research or business research, and, challenging and integrating and, and having a discussion with academics.
I think you got stumbled on something.
That's the picture I always had, but I worked out how to get it going from both. And I raise it with academics. They say, industry is not interested. They're too busy doing their own thing. When I raise it with practitioners, they say, why would I come and listen to academics? They don't know their front end from their back end. So you get that.
Well, maybe that's where we lay down the challenge to our audience, is to engage with you and engage with others and see if we can figure out a solution to this one. No, definitely, Paul.
So I just put that on the table.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you did. So Paul, again, thank you so much for being a great guest and investing your time coming on the show with us today.
No worries, Andrew.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to know more about our guests today, their bio, and follow up on the resources mentioned during the show, you can find all the relevant links and more at sitnshow.com. There you'll also be able to get access to earlier shows, read the latest blogs. There's also an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter, which will give you heads up as to when the next show is coming out, latest events, news, and anything that's going to be relevant to help you have a fun, rewarding and successful career in finance and accounting. And just before you go, we really appreciate your feedback. If there's something we can do better on the show, something that's not working, or something you'd like to see, even a guest you'd like for us to invite onto the show, someone who you think might be able to benefit you more and also the rest of our community, please let me know. You can email me. I'm at andrew@sitnshow.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message so I know how you found me and we can connect. And really, it's our community that'll make the show. If we keep engaging and driving each other on, we'll keep on building our strength in the numbers. When all is said and done, if we can do the numbers better and finance better, we'll create more opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our families, our communities and our businesses. So until next time, have a good rest of the week, take care, and let's keep building our strength in the numbers.